our lessons tonight on living by faith.
Hebrews chapter 11. Did anybody know that Hebrews chapter 11 was the Hall of Faith? I had never heard it called the Hall of Faith. I knew that it was the faith chapter. The Lord has really dealt with me over the last year. I think a lot of times, growing up and becoming a Christian at a young age, I think that sometimes we use the word or we use the phrase "living by faith" sort of loosely, because I think a lot of times we live and we do have, don't get me wrong, we do have faith, but sometimes when you have to step out on faith and live by faith, I thought it could be a little bit challenging. So the Lord, He's been dealing with me this past year, trying to teach me how to trust in Him for everything, even the little smallest things. A lot of times you think, oh, I can handle this, or I got this, and so forth. But, sometimes, a lot of times we need help to live by faith. So I got that on my mind, and so we started preparing last night after being called. And it was just on my mind to do faith. So, of course, I went to Hebrews chapter 11. Tonight we're going to read, it's a long chapter, it's about 40 verses. We're going to read some of it, but we want to talk to you about the people that live by faith, some examples that we picked up and we see in the Bible, and stories that probably you guys may know better than I do, but I just wanted us to revisit some examples of how people live by faith, what they did to show that they were living by faith.
Now, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what is visible.
Sorry, I thought I had to run there.
So, tonight, I never really thought about it, but if you think about when the universe was formed and God spoke, what He did was He spoke at His command. The earth was formed, the sea and the earth was separated. So, the creation, as He spoke creation into existence, we have to take that by faith, because we can't see that. So that's what those three verses are saying, is that what we now see did not come from anything that could be seen. Because God, remember, as He was talking, "Let there be light," the earth was formed by His command. So that was a little bit confusing in the King James version, but that's what that was saying, is at His command. Now that's wonderful how He could just speak and things would just go into place.
By faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did, and by faith he was commended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offering. And by faith he still speaks, even though he is dead.
Okay, so Cain, have you ever thought about Cain and Abel, and why Abel's sacrifice was so much better than Cain's, and why Abel's was sort of favored? Abel, he offered his sacrifice. He was a shepherd or a herdsman, and Cain was a farmer. There's nothing wrong with that. But Cain, by faith, having faith, he presented his sacrifice. And so his sacrifice was found as a more excellent sacrifice than Cain's. And if we go on to read the story, Cain didn't like that. So Cain, he didn't try to build on his faith and try to make his sacrifices better. He was jealous and he killed Abel. But keep in mind that Abel did have the more excellent sacrifice. And I couldn't understand why one offering was better than the other until I got to read last night or this afternoon about Abel. I'm sorry, I'm saying Cain and Abel. But Abel's was more excellent than Cain's was.
And verse number 5 says, "By faith Enoch was taken from this life, so he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him.
Okay, so Enoch, he lived 365 years, and he found favor with God. Enoch was the son of Jared. Jared was 162 years old when Enoch was born. Well, Enoch enjoyed a close and a good relationship with God throughout his life. Then suddenly, like Phyllis was reading, and suddenly he disappeared because God took him. So he didn't go by the grave, but God took Enoch up. And that was by faith. He walked with Jesus daily in his life, walking by faith in Jesus.
And verse number 7 says, by faith Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. And by his faith he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that comes by faith.
Okay, so Noah had not seen rain. It had not rained upon the earth like this rain was going to be, like flooded waters. So Noah took on faith. He started building a boat. Nobody knew what a boat was, so he started building an ark that would house the people that wanted to come in. That included, in the end, Noah's family and, of course, the animals with him. And at this point, when the floodwaters came, Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters was upon the earth. So by faith, he took, I saw a movie of it. People were making fun of Noah for building this boat because they didn't know anything about floods, or they had not seen enough rain to cause floods. So by faith, Noah did what the Lord had planned for him, and he survived. Of course, he and his family survived the flood.
And verse 8 says, by faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as an inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith he made his home in the promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were herds with him of the same promise.
Okay, so Abram, later to be called Abraham, stepped out on faith. He had faith in God. He didn't know where he was going to go. A lot of times it's hard for us to pack up and go to places that we don't know, that people we don't know, and people we're not familiar with. But Abraham stepped out on faith, knowing that God was good on His word, and would make good on His word.
And verse number 11 says, and by faith Abraham, even though he was past age, and Sarah herself was barren, was able to become a father, because he considered him faithful, who had made the promise. And so from this old man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the skies, and as countless as the sand on the seashore.
Okay, so God promised a child to Sarah. She was 90 years old when she had the baby, so she may have been about 89 when the child was promised. God's going to make great nations, and as we read through, saw that God did make great nation. In Genesis 15, 17, and 18, God promised His child. As you read, God promised Sarah a child 3 different times. And in Genesis 21, let me read what Genesis 21 says to us, 1 through 3. The birth of Isaac. Then the Lord did exactly what He had promised. See, God will do 3 things. Do 3 things for us. He always does what's right. He always does He always meets His promises, and He's never late. So He'll do what's right. He'll keep His promises, and He's always on time. He's never late. So then God did exactly what He had promised. Sarah became pregnant, and she gave His son to Abraham in his old age. 100 years old he was. It all happened at the time God said it would, and Abraham named his son Isaac. So he kept his promise. He made the promise on three separate occasions in Genesis. And in Genesis 21, 1 through 3, it tells us about how he kept his promise.
By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had received the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead, and figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead.
Okay, so Isaac stepped out on faith. You know, he was the promised child. God had promised the child, and he had delivered on his promise, and now God's telling Abraham to take Isaac as a sacrifice. So Isaac, he packed up. So he gets ready. He's going on a trip with his dad, Abraham. And so they pack up the donkeys, and they get a couple people go with them, got the firewood, they got the fire, and they go, and Isaac don't understand where the sacrifice is because they don't actually have a lamb or ram with them. So by faith, Abraham goes, and he gets ready to kill Isaac, but the angel of the Lord said, "Don't touch it, don't touch it." And so as they look over into the brush or the thicket, there was a ram for the sacrifice. But Abraham, he left his home. He traveled to a mountain where the Lord told him to go. He went there. He was getting ready to sacrifice his son. But by faith, that was by faith. He followed what God had said, because God had made the promise, like you said, that he would be, you know, a great nation, and Isaac was to be the offspring.
By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future.
Okay, so Isaac, as he's getting old, as he has children, he has Jacob and Esau, and Isaac blesses Jacob and Esau, and Jacob, if you remember, he stole Esau's birthright, and so he got the blessing that Esau was thinking he would get. And so as it's talking in Genesis 27 and 28, Jacob gets the firstborn. He gets, as the firstborn, since he's got a stolen birthright, he gets the blessing. But also it says there that Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau by telling them of things to come. So by faith, these people in the Bible, by faith, they're depending on God to see them through.
Verse 21, by faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff.
Can anybody tell me something about Joseph? Do you remember Joseph? Did Joseph have a coat of many colors? He was a dreamer, wasn't he? If you remember anything about him, he was a dreamer. And he would go tell his brothers of the dream that he would have, and they would get mad with him. So do you remember that they sold him off to people that was going down to Egypt, and they made out like to his father that he was to Jacob that he had been killed. Remember, they took the coat of many colors back to Jacob. It had blood on it, and so he thought it was Joseph for years. So years he went thinking that his son was dead. Well, anyway, a famine come across the land, and a couple of the brothers had to go down to try to buy some grain there in Egypt, because Joseph had become real big.
You make it like it.
I just didn't want her to fall. Okay. So Joseph had become like he was the keeper of the grain. So they did have like a family reunion, and Pharaoh let Joseph's brothers and father Jacob come down to live in Egypt through the famine, because Egypt had a bunch of food stored up. So they had enough grain because they had planned ahead. So they had enough grain for everybody. And so Joseph's family, they come down to live in Egypt. Well, by this time, after Jacob had been there a while with his family, he was getting ready to die. And so Joseph takes his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, in to get a blessing. So Jacob, by faith, he was able to do the things that he did. He was able to bless his grandchildren and live to see Joseph again.